Wait,
Hello, welcome to Canadian music in the 80s and 90s and more, the YouTube channel and my Facebook group. And I guess we could call today Alan Squared, I guess, because my guest is a radio journalist and long time, I would call you music expert, Alan Cross. Thanks for joining me today.
are you welcome in my backyard in Oakville, Ontario, underneath the flight path for Pearson. So you're going to hear some jets flying overhead every once in a while.
Oh, I'm used to that. Very used to that. I worked at Woodbine Racetrack for a long time.
Oh, you know exactly what I'm talking about there.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Um, I don't know where to start, but there's lots I want to talk about. I kind of specialize in Canadian music, but we don't have to just talk about Canadian music. We can talk about whatever we happen to track across. I guess I want to know when did you start getting in? When did you get interested in radio? Like, where was your first love for it before you started working in it?
Oh, well, before we begin, the reason I'm so sweaty, so I apologize. Healthy. I got a radio for my sixth birthday. My grandmother gave it to me. I don't know why. My mother never asked her to give me a radio. I didn't ask for one, but I got one for my sixth birthday. And this opened up a whole new world for me simply because I was growing up in a small town north of Winnipeg. We had three TV channels. One of them was in French. And the only radio I knew about was what my mom and dad played from the kitchen counter or when we were in the car. But when I got my own little radio, I realized that there was much more to the world than my small town, beyond just other radio stations in Winnipeg and beyond. And I became absolutely fascinated by all these voices and this music and this information and this news coming from somewhere. And I would spend evenings trying to tune in as many stations as I possibly could. And if you're living in Winnipeg or outside of Winnipeg in the wintertime, you have the atmospheric skip of the ionosphere during those seasons. And you can get stations from Chicago and Denver and Minneapolis and Cincinnati and Louisville, Kentucky, and all over the place. And it just made such an impact on me that I thought, this would be kind of cool if I could get involved in doing something like this one day. And I would hammer my dad, ask him, can we please stop at a radio station? They can maybe give us a tour. Can we stop at this guy who's doing a sales remote so I can see how he does it? And that's basically how it all started.
And did you go to school did you take it in school or did you take journalism or something like in college or?
No, no, I did not. The deal was, sorry, I got to get the ball here for the dog. No, I had it in my head that I was going to be some kind of a journalist. I was going to be a news anchor, a reporter, a foreign correspondent, something like that. And there was precious little in the way of formal schools in where I was growing up. And I happened to get a scholarship at the University of Winnipeg. So I took all the courses that I thought would be important. So that would be history and political science and sociology, French, and so on, thinking that that would be a good enough education.
Right.
Meanwhile, I also got a shift at the campus radio station, and that's sort of where it all started. I eventually got a part-time job at a elevator music radio station, seriously, an elevator music radio station that played mostly instrumentals, really sleepy instrumentals, lots of strings and orchestras. And I worked there through the rest of university, and then I got my first full-time job in Kenora, Ontario. And when I was hired, I was told by the guy who ran the place that if I just hung out for a couple of months, the guy that was doing news was going to quit. And as soon as he quit, I could have his job. Well, fantastic. So I spent that summer just playing records and talking on the radio. And then came September, the guy did quit. And after Labor Day, I became the news person. And I hated it. I can't tell you how much I hated the gig. And I lasted 23 days doing that. Right. Fortunately, a radio station that I had applied to earlier asked me if I wanted to work at this FM rock station, a very progressive rock station for a city of 35,000, which was Brandon, Manitoba. And I tell you, I left Kenora so fast that my landlord sent the sheriff after me for non-payment of rent. And since then, I've been, playing records and talking on the radio.
So you're obviously quite passionate about music right from the beginning. What was your kind of influences early in the days?
That's a really good question. Simply because there was not a lot of music in my house. My sister and I are both heavily into music, but my parents were never the kind of people to a record on or listen to music for enjoyment or anything like that, which was kind of weird. But if we really distill it down, um, my uncle worked for the Manitoba telephone system, and he had a side gig servicing jukeboxes. And one Sunday, we went over to his place, and he had all these old, worn out records from the jukeboxes on his rounds. And he said, I'm going to throw these out. Do you want them? Okay, fine. And that really became the basis of my record collection. And another thing that factored into it, if you are growing up in the prairies and you're not good at hockey and you're good in school, you're opening yourself up to all kinds of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to keep myself from getting stuffed into too many lockers, I developed this thing as the music guy, the music nerd in the school. And that gave me a measure of respect. Not enough to get me girls, but certainly enough to keep me from getting beaten up.
Whatever works, right?
Whatever works, yes.
So let's skip ahead. When did you wind up in Toronto?
1986.
Okay.
I had worked in Selkirk, Manitoba, Kenora, Ontario, Brandon, Manitoba. I did 2 years in Winnipeg, and then I got into a fight with my boss, and out of sheer desperation, applied to a bunch of radio stations, hoping to get out. And the only radio station that responded to my pleas was CFNY, now The Edge. And I started there on October the 3rd, 1986.
So you were there really in the early days too. Like
the station had more or less turned out to be, it went on the air in 1977.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there, in the middle of the whole Spirit of Radio years. So David Marsden and Don Burns and Live
Right.
Earl Jive and James Scott and JR and all those Pete and Gates, all those people. That's where I came in.
Oh, very cool. Were you just playing music at the time, or were you doing?
Yeah, I was hired to do 5 all nights and 1 Saturday morning. So working 6 days a week for $17,500 a year. And at that time, I think $640 of that every month was going to rent. So there was not a lot of money to be had.
No.
But it was a fascinating arrangement, very interesting environment, because we were the underdogs working at this weird radio station out in the suburbs, and we knew that we were never ever going to be number one. Just we were just too niche, but we were on this mission to bring great music to the audience, and we loved what we did.
No, what I really wanted to get into, I kind of specialize in Canadian music in the 80s and the 90s because it's kind of my passion and when I grew up. You guys broke quite a few bands on that station that wouldn't have gotten airplay anywhere else. Like,
this is true. There were a couple of reasons for that. First of all, David Marsden was very committed. He was the program director. He was very committed to supporting local talents.
Right.
Number two, at that time, FM radio stations had a lot of regulatory things that they had to fulfill. And one of them was supporting Canadian talent. And there were things like Canadian talent development and the CanCon and, anything that we had to support a lot of Canadian stuff. And third, we found that it was actually good business because there was an appetite for this, especially the kind of music that we were playing. So we had things like the Streets of Ontario. We had things like a director of Canadian talent. We had the the UNO Awards and the Casby Awards. We had our Canada Day celebrations where the lineup was almost exclusively Canadian. So yeah, we did an awful lot. Starting Teenage Head and Tragically Hip, and it just Parachute Club and Pursuit of Happiness. It just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, because I talked to Rob Pruce yesterday from the Spoons. He said you guys were integral in playing their music at first.
Oh yeah, Rob's a good guy, and yes, we played an awful lot of Spoons from the very, very beginning. Oh, there's a jet flying overhead.
Awesome.
Private jet. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. The Spoons emerged in the early 1980s out of Burlington, Ontario, and they were right in the heart of that synthesizer alternative techno pop thing, and
yeah,
the station became a big supporter with them.
Yeah, because it was definitely, I mean, because I didn't hear a lot of stations really latching onto them before you guys did, because you guys were definitely playing music like that
Yeah, it wasn't until
beforehand.
the Nile the it wasn't until the Nile Rodgers album that things really took off. But there were the EP and the album came before that we certainly supported them quite a bit.
And that carried right over into the heyday of the Edge in the 90s. Like, um, you guys really played a lot of Canadian bands, like the 90s alternative scene with Canadian music really took off.
Yes. Well, big 777 fly overhead now. Hang on. Yeah, we did. Now, what was interesting is that if we look at the 90s, and as somebody who has studied this, you'll know this, is that there was a big sea change where after a couple of years, a couple of decades of Canadian content, where a lot of Canadians thought that Canadian music was substandard when compared to the music coming out from other places around the
Right.
planet. In the 90s, we kind of woke up and went, okay, you know what? There's a lot of really good stuff coming out of this country.
Yeah.
We had matured as an industry. We had matured as a country that could support this talent. And not only was the music good, but there was a demand for it. The Generation X, when they came along in that decade, um, realized that had a demand, had a want, had a need for homegrown music,
Mhm.
and they were this generation got firmly behind a lot of these acts that came out in the very late 80s and into the 1990s. We can start, I guess, with the Tragically Hip and the Bare Naked Ladies, but then we go on with I Mother Earth and Matt Good and the Tea Party and Our Lady Peace and um, on and on and on and on, to the point where we were able to put Edgefest shows on tour across the country featuring largely Canadian lineups, and it was really interesting to see um, the country come of age musically,
Yeah.
and the nationalism that was behind it. I mean, this is where the Tragically Hip story really begins, with everybody rallying around behind them because first of all they were good, but second they were unabashedly Canadian. They had no trouble singing about Canadian things and Canadian um, uh, symbols and iconography. I mean that word, um, and that just reinforced this idea that what, we can hold our own against the rest of the planet.
Yeah, I also take out bands like 5440 who started in the 80s and carried that over into the 90s with you guys, who I think got even more popular as time went on.
5440 had a hell of a run from about 89 through to 1997 or 1998. So yeah, um, and we can even go back further. They come out in the early 80s. They were part of that Vancouver scene that had the Payolas and a few other groups. And yeah, they were the 5440 years still with us. Um, and they helped form the bedrock for this can rock renaissance that we saw for much of that decade.
Three bands that I kind of have been lumping together mainly because we lost three key members of their band. Like, I consider Spirit of the West, the Tragically Hip, and Rush.
Yep.
I think they all ended in the same year because of the illnesses in the band. And I lump Spirit of the West in there because I think they were just as important to Canada as anyone was.
No,
Um,
I would absolutely agree. I mean, John Mann was a hell of a front man, and he was a very good lyricist as well. And we supported the heck out of Spirit of the West.
mhm.
Um, Don Burns was was a big fan of what they did, so we booked them for a lot of our shows. Whenever there was a record out, we would play them, and whenever they were in town, they came to visit.
No, yeah, I found um, it really is sad to see those three bands not doing what they do anymore because it just every time Spirit of the West came anywhere to Ontario, I went to see them. And
Don't
I don't regret any of the times I ever saw them. They were just amazing every time I saw them.
Yeah, I think the last time I saw John Mann's last performance at the Horseshoe Tavern in Toronto before things really deteriorated for him,
Right.
and it was a fantastic show. But at this, and everybody, it was a celebration of everything that he had done and Spirit of the West had done. But at the same time, you knew that this was the end. This was approaching the end.
I also wanted to talk a little bit because I have fond memories of you breaking a lot of big music stories. Like I was listening the day that you
Oh,
said that Kurt Cobain passed away. Like I was listening that day. And that was sounded like one of the hardest things you ever had to do.
you cut out there for again. Say ask the question again.
Oh, sorry. I have a lot of fond memories of hearing you break major music stories, like when Kurt Cobain passed away. I was listening that
Yeah.
day. Like
You know
how,
how many people have told me that? And weirdly, I remember thinking at that time that this was a John Lennon, Elvis Presley, JFK moment. Don't screw it up, because
yeah.
this was before the internet. This was when radio was the
Mhm.
ultimate social network. If you wanted to know what was happening in real time, your best bet was to listen to the radio. And we were right in the thick of things there on that Friday in 1994. And yeah, that will be with me forever.
For sure. And I guess even, I don't know, did you break the news of Gord Downey passing away?
No, I was not on the air on a regular basis at that time. However, I did. Oh God, I remember that day. I think it was a Tuesday, and I remember. I think I did 17 or 18 interviews
Right.
with radio stations and TV stations across the country that day. That was a crazy, crazy, crazy day.
Do you gotta count I also give Much Music a lot of credit for breaking a lot of Canadian bands as well. I thought they, alongside with you guys, did a lot to support Canadian talent.
Yeah, MTV signs on in August of 1991, and after a couple of years, it went from being this weird novelty to something that was absolutely essential to the music industry. And we wanted to watch it here in Canada, but CRTC would have none of it because there were no Canadian content rules. So they took all kinds of bids to see if we could create a homegrown video music channel. Chum One, called it Much Music, signs on in August of 1984. And from that point on, MTV was essentially illegal in Canada. You weren't allowed to acquire it in any way, um, because it was all about Much Music. And you can't underestimate the importance Much Music had on the country, because for the very first time, I mean, we had the CBC, but the CBC was more of a upper end news and information
Right.
network when it came to radio. With Much Music, for the first time, we had a national music station. And for the first time, a kid in St. John's, Newfoundland, was in touch with what was happening on the streets of Toronto, the streets of Montreal, the streets of Calgary, the streets of Vancouver. Um, Same thing with a kid in Whitehorse or in Yellowknife.
Right.
And it really brought the country together in ways that no other outlet had ever done. Plus, part of what they had to do was create a fund called Facts that artists could draw from to make homegrown Canadian music videos. Because really, before Much Music comes along, there isn't a music video industry in Canada. I mean, there was a music video industry in the US, but it was still quite young because of MTV. The UK was a different story because they had been filming music clips for decades. But
Right.
until Much Music came along with Video Facts and got money in the hands of directors and bands to make their own music videos, we didn't have anything. And then, of course, along comes big things like Big Shiny Tunes and all the cross country things. It really, really. I am going to switch this to. I'm going to turn this off, and we will go strictly cellular. There, that should be better.
Okay. Thank you.
There we go.
But yeah, I always take the Pursuit of Happiness as an example because I don't think they even had a record out. when Much Music started playing I'm an Adult Now on a regular basis.
They didn't. They had a 12-inch single that they had done in 1980, late 86, I think it was, which we were also playing. And they did, I think they shot the video in a parking lot down the street from Much Music on Queen Street. I think they spent $300 on it. And that song led to a deal, and that first album with Todd Rundgren. So yeah, absolutely. The Pursuit of Happiness would not have existed in the form that they did had it not been for Much Music.
Like, yeah, because I like the fact that, I mean, I guess it was under the old Moses Neimer guard. They played anything. If you were a Canadian band and you had a video, they would play it.
Well, yeah, they had to for a large because they were, what was it? I guess they were playing 30% Canadian content, and for the longest time there wasn't enough. There weren't enough videos to fill that 30%. I mean, when you think about when MTV signed on in 1981, they only had in their library 250 videos.
Oh, really?
That's all they had, and 30 of those videos were by Rod Stewart. So it was real slim pickings for a very long time. So fast forward 1984, yeah, we have a bunch of international clips that we could choose from, if speaking as Much Music. But how many Canadian videos were there? There weren't that many. So if you had a video, listen, we got a quota, we got to fill, send it over, and we'll play it.
But it was great though, because I just like the fact that anything went on that channel. Like, I mean, even in the early 90s, they made a superstar out of Stompin' Tom again.
Yeah,
by playing that Margot's Cargo video over and over again. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, again, they needed the videos, and if you're that powerful and you have if you decide to do something, you could make anybody a star.
Yeah, for sure. And they did. And another thing I wasn't aware of is some of those VJs are actually musicians themselves. Like, I didn't know Chris Ward.
Oh yeah.
At the time, I didn't know Chris Ward was a musician until I found out that he co-wrote Black Velvet with Alana Miles.
Yep.
Like, unbelievable. Like, and I think is that Dan Gallagher that co-wrote Digging a Hole with Big Sugar?
I'm not sure about that one.
I thought I saw Dan Gallagher in the writing credits, and I wasn't sure if it was the same one that used to be on.
Can't tell you if it is.
Yeah, but I wanted to touch base on some of the interviews you've done over here. You've obviously had a lot of great interviews. Who are some of your favorites, Canadian or otherwise?
Oh, well, God, that's a tough one. I mean, let's put it this way: there are only 3 acts that I regret not having been able to talk to. I haven't talked to anybody from the Rolling Stones. I haven't talked to anybody from Pink Floyd, and I haven't talked to Elton John. But beyond that, I've spoken with just about everybody that I've ever wanted to, and each time has been a thrill because you can't do this without being a music fan. Bowie was great. Bono is always fantastic because you don't have to do anything; you just have to say, "Hey, Bono, how's it going?" and he talks nonstop for the next 45 minutes. Some acts are a little harder than other to come out of their shell. I mean, a Depeche Mode interview is sometimes kind of painful because they're very quiet and shy. But then you get a Noel Gallagher, and it's like, look out, because you never know what he's going to say.
But probably they're one of your favorite bands, from what I know, isn't it?
Oh, they are. Yeah. I've interviewed Noel and Liam a couple of times, and the beautiful thing is about those guys is that they are exactly how you would hope them to be in an interview, which are jerks. Right. It's the last thing you want to do is walk into a room with Noel Gallagher and have him be polite. That's the last thing you want. Same thing with Liam, and it's they promised and they delivered.
That's awesome. So what obviously ongoing history, new music, which I listen to religiously because I wanted to know everything about music. I don't just like listening to it. I like hearing the stories behind it. I like hearing, and you've obviously got a passion for digging up that information. And I think it was great that I could go listen to old episodes without actually listening live on the radio.
And I guess that's a development that radio has seen with the advent of podcasting starting, 8, 9 years ago now.
Yeah.
For the longest time, radio stations didn't want to get into podcasting because they thought that that would cannibalize their on-air listing. Well, maybe back in the day, but now, people demand stuff on demand and
Right.
on their schedule. The big 777 going on every head. So podcasting is a great way to augment what you hear on the radio. Sure, you can still have the appointment listening and tune in when it runs, but then if you miss it, you can always go to whatever podcast platform you want and pick it up from there. We've got over 300 podcasts up and available, and they've been downloaded something like 20 million times. So it seems to be working.
I also enjoyed some of your blog posts about your box. You did one on all your box sets that you had.
Yes.
And I really got a kick out of that. I didn't even know some of those box sets existed. There were so many that came out back in the day.
Yeah, they still come out. They're more expensive than they ever used to be. There are a couple coming out this fall. I can't think of anybody right now, but there's a couple coming out this fall that are on my wish list. Not necessarily, well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, they're cool to have. I mean,
Yeah.
Anybody who collects something shouldn't have to justify why they want to collect something. It just makes you feel good. You can touch them, you can read them, you can hold them, you can play them, whatever. Fine. But they can be real interesting documents of the career of an artist, and you
Right.
often find stuff there that you will never find anywhere else.
Yeah,
Oh,
this is a
I know.
guilty pleasure.
Yeah, there is a Who box set for the Who's next album coming out this fall. That's one of the ones I want, and I think it's got like 75 unreleased tracks. So okay.
So much stuff in vaults with these bands, I guess, like that
Oh
you
yeah.
didn't even know existed.
Well, you don't, and the problem is that a lot of the stuff was thrown out because magnetic
Right.
recording tape was really, really expensive. So if two things would happen: you reuse the tape, so you recorded over what was ever on there,
Yeah.
or B, you just tossed it in a dumpster behind the studio, which is where a lot of bootlegs came from back in the day. People would go behind the studio or behind, someplace where they knew that there was a vault of recording studio, and they would just dumpster dive and see what they could find. And that's how we ended up with a lot of outtakes and alternate takes and half takes and all that sort of stuff on bootleg records and CDs.
Or audio guys who recorded something off the audio board when they were doing a concert or something, maybe.
Maybe, yes. There were certain rules that were, let's say, fast and loose in certain places in Europe when it came to live recordings. And I used to be a really big collector of some of these CDs. There was a label called KTS.
Okay.
KTS, which I think is for Kiss the Stone, specialized in soundboard recordings. So you would get some absolutely pristine live recordings from that label. Mostly they were out of Italy or Germany or San Marino or places like that.
Well, I guess my guilty pleasure, I just heard that they're releasing the Van Hagar edition of Van Halen albums remastered finally.
Yeah, on CD and vinyl. Yeah, see, there are two types of people in this world. There's a David Lee Roth Van Halen fan and a Sammy Hagar Van Halen fan. I'm DLR all the way. There's about 3 songs with Sammy I could stand. The rest is just like, no, give me Dave.
I like it all. I've come to the conclusion it wasn't about Dave or Sammy, it was all about Eddie.
Always about Eddie. And that's that weird snare drum sound that Alex managed to get.
That too. Like Eddie had a way of writing great melodic songs, and I don't
Sure did.
think it mattered who sang on it. And I even liked his keyboard stuff. I thought he was a very talented guy. He could play any instrument he wanted to.
Yeah, I remember when that album came out, and we got Jump. I was 84, I guess, and Jump came out. I mean, the purists were like, you have to understand that back in that time, synthesizers were considered to be evil because they weren't real musical instruments.
Right.
So for a synthesizer to show up on a Van Halen record, oh my God, it was considered to be like a giant sellout. But you know what? We adapted.
Oh, I remember those days very vividly. I remember you were either into rock music or you were into new wave music, and you couldn't be into to both. You
Nope.
just couldn't.
Nope. It was absolutely forbidden.
Yep, I remember getting picked on because I liked Van Halen and Quiet Riot and all those metal bands from Los Angeles, but I also kind of like Billy Idol and I also kind of like Depeche Mode, and I was picked on a little bit by some of the crowds that.
Yeah, you were walking a really tight line there. Billy Idol, you could probably get away with because of
Yeah,
Steve Stevens' his guitar, but Depeche Mode, oh no, they wore makeup. They didn't have a drummer. Oh no, that was really difficult.
it was sinful. Yeah, it's amazing how things have changed. You're pretty much anything goes these days,
Yep.
which is good. Which is good. I think it's great. But when do you think? Obviously, you guys got really big on the edge with the grunge movement. Um, I personally think it started with Guns N' Roses, kind of.
Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, there was this throughout the '80s. There was hair metal, which was designed to be outrageous and over the top and excessive. Um, and the hair metal bands try to outdo each other with more spandex, more hair, more makeup, more whatever. By the time Guns N' Roses comes along in 1987, we're starting to see parts of hair metal deteriorate
Yeah,
because we're getting it. There's too many of them, too many hair metal bands, and power ballads.
yeah,
God, so many power ballads. But then Guns N' Roses comes along, and it's like, this is a genuinely dangerous band.
yeah. They were raw. They were edgy. They weren't overproduced. And I think they kind of got the mainstream ready for what Nirvana and Soundgarden and Pearl Jam were gonna get on it.
Yeah,
Put on
I,
us.
I, I think you're right. I think you're right. They were in no way, shape, or form alternative,
No,
but they did start tipping the scales towards something angry and dangerous, and
yeah.
that's what, at least left of center,
Hmm.
and uncontrollable and authentic. Um, like nobody ever called Guns N' Roses fakers, never.
No, yeah,
So and then Axel and Slash wanted Nirvana to tour to open for Guns N' Roses. So there was a kinship there. Duff McKagan comes from Seattle, and he was in all these different punk bands and
right.
hardcore bands growing up before he moves to Los Angeles. So yeah, there's some common DNA there, definitely.
I just thought it got it was I never would have picked when I first heard Appetite for Destruction that it would get as big as it did, especially in the mainstream. I wouldn't have picked that at all, especially with the way, like you said, the spandex kind of thing was kind of ruling the roost at the time.
Yeah, but they never got into that. The
Yeah,
craziest makeup, the craziest outfits that they had were Slash's top hat and Axel's bandana.
yeah,
Uh, Otherwise, they were throwback. They were a throwback dangerous gang.
for sure, for sure. And it was I just thought it was different than anything else that was out at the time.
Sure was.
And but where where do you think the first real Canadian grunge band might have started out? Like I'm thinking maybe Teenage Head with the punk
Well,
scene
Teenage Day,
anyway.
no, that they were punky. If we look at one of the things that identifies grunge is the guitars.
Right.
So I mean, if you go and you look at 5440 and Baby Ran,
Yeah.
if that song had come out 10 years later, that'd be a grunge song.
Yeah.
So it was happening there. These the heavy, thick, down-tuned guitars were there in the background. You have to have that, but there's got to be a little bit of pop music sensibility on top of that with the melody.
Yeah.
And I think we could make a real argument for 5440.
I was also thinking maybe he didn't get as big as some of us did. I was even thinking maybe an Art Bergman.
Art Bergman was an interesting character. Yeah, he had that. If his music had been a little bit more anthemic,
Hmm.
I think you're right. Art continues to be a very good songwriter and a very dangerous
Yeah.
like sort of guy. But he never ended up on the right labels. I don't think he had the right management. I don't think he wanted to play the game. And although he put out some really interesting music, it just wasn't quite. He was probably ahead of his time, and at the same time, wasn't quite. Uh, it wasn't quite ready for mainstream consumption.
Like maybe that same thing with the Sons of Freedom, even.
Sons of Freedom were closer
Yeah,
when they, so that's 80, 88, 89. Songs like Mona Lisa. They're close. They're extremely close, and they were probably like 2 years ahead of their time. But they did manage to get caught up in the grunge slipstream, or at least the Canadian the can rock slipstream of the 1990s.
it really is amazing how certain kinds of music break for some people, but not for some. Like for example, I'm thinking the bluegrass scene lately. Billy Strings is getting a lot of attention. Who I don't know if you've heard of.
Yeah, there are certain types of music that I run away from simply because either I don't get it or I actually find it annoying. I,
Yeah,
I and this is not a judgment call on specific genres of music,
right.
but for example, I cannot, and I have tried. I cannot do anything countryish. Nothing.
I hear where you're coming from. I'm that way with the newer country personally, but I just I find I like musical talent no matter what it is. And
You can appreciate musical talent and
oh
ability,
yeah,
absolutely, but at the same time, and you should try, no matter what kind of music. But at the same time, do I put it to listen to for pleasure and relaxation? No.
yeah. But I mean, he's an amazing guitar player. That's what just blows me away how good of a guitar player is. But I mean, Canada has JP Cormier from the East Coast who has been making that kind of music for years and has never broken the way this guy has.
Yeah,
So
it's true.
it's just funny the way certain people will break a certain kind of music and someone who's been doing it for years never gets the time of day.
A lot of it, if this was a meritocracy, we would see a lot more interesting artists break through, but it's not. I mean, you have to be in the right place at the right time with the right songs, with the right management. The audience has to be there at exactly the right time. It's there's so much luck involved,
Yeah,
and like Jean-Luc Picard used to say on Star Trek, you can do everything right and still lose. That's
yeah,
not weakness. That's
that's
life.
very true. Very true. Alan, I can't thank you for joining me today. It's been a kind of a dream to get you on my
Oh,
podcast. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I'm having a great time doing it. I don't get paid for this, but it's so much fun. And to talk to someone of your stature and great music knowledge, it's just awesome. I could do this forever.
you're very welcome. Glad to help.
Thanks. Hope to talk to you soon and
Oh,
take care of yourself, sir.
and congratulate your parents for spelling your name right.
Well, I can't because they passed away last year, but yes. Actually, Alan's my middle name, but my real first name's David. But they've been calling me Alan my whole life, so I just kind of stuck with it.
It's a good name. Stick with it.
Yeah, don't break what's not broken, right?
Right.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Hey, you bet. See you later.
Bye.